I'm Dr. John Torres with NBC News. Welcome to Facebook Live. Today, NBC News is devoting its homepage and all its digital platforms to a special collection of reports showing the looming pain of the coronavirus pandemic and the paths that could lead to the country out of it. So what I want to do today is essentially talk about what's been going on over the last couple of days with the vaccine and the authorization process that is going on and what that means going forward, what steps need to be taken, and where we are on those steps, and when people essentially are going to start getting shots in arms. So yesterday, the FDA advisory committee called the VRBPAC, that's the Vaccines and Related Biologics Advisory Committee, Advisory Committee, met, and they essentially are an advisory committee, an expert panel of physicians, scientists, even the lawyers on the panel, to look at the information behind the vaccine itself, in this case the Pfizer vaccine. And it's very vaccine specific. And they answer one question, and the question they answered at the end of the day is the Pfizer vaccine, the risk of the Pfizer vaccine and the benefit, looking at those two things, do the benefits outweigh the risk for people getting COVID-19 ages 16 and above? And we'll talk about that in just a minute here. But at the end of the day, they voted saying yes, they think the benefits outweigh the risks, and so they voted to go ahead and move forward with the authorization. Now what will happen is it will go to the FDA itself, which it already has gone to. The FDA will now make a decision based on the advisory panel's recommendation. But you do have to remember, this advisory panel is just that. They're an advisory panel. They give the information to the FDA. They say, this is our advice on where you should go with this. And the FDA takes that advice and then makes their own decision. 85% of the time, historically, they follow the advice of the advisory panel, the VRBPAC, and they go from there. And they use that information to find out what they need to do to go forward with this to make sure that the vaccine gets either approved authorized or not. In this case, and just to highlight the distinction, this is an emergency use authorization. This is not an approval. Difference being an approval is permanent, and it's something that's usually done over many, many years. They look at all the information, they look at it very diligently, they go back with more questions, and they do it over a long period of time. It gets a permanent approval and moves forward from there. This is an emergency use authorization, and it truly is that. It's an authorization that they use in times of emergency, like the pandemic. And so in this case, what they're saying is we have enough information to make a very informed decision on whether we can authorize this based on that benefit-risk ratio. Is the benefit better than the risk of having COVID out there, having the pandemic going forward, and people dying from it every day like they are? And in this case, they said, yes, that is exactly what we think, that the benefit of getting a shot certainly is much better than the risk of having no shot and having the pandemic continue throughout time over the next couple of months. And so what will happen from here, this advisory panel, again, gave its advice to the FDA. The FDA will look at it today and tomorrow. Either today or tomorrow, they're going to go ahead and vote on that. They're not vote on it. They're going to go ahead and decide whether they get this authorization or not. And in this case, what they've done is they've already informed the sponsor, this is Pfizer, that's going to work rapidly towards this finalization, and they're going to issue an emergency use authorization. They're already saying they're looking towards doing that. They also notified the CDC that they're going to do this in Operation Warp Speed, so the CDC and Operation Warp Speed can work towards that vaccine distribution. And I'll explain a little bit where the CDC comes into play here and what that means. So essentially, again, the VRBPAC, this committee, this advisory committee for the FDA, came out and they said, based on all the information we have right now, we want to go ahead and move forward with the emergency use authorization for the COVID vaccine for people 16 and above. Now, up until now, 18 and above is what most people thought they would be trying to authorize. They pushed that number down to 16 for a variety of reasons. One, there is some data out there on 16 and 17-year-olds. Two, we also know that that age group, of all the kids that are going to school, that age group is at highest risk for getting it, spreading it, and complications from coronavirus, so they want to cover that as well. That caused a bit of conversation yesterday during the VRBPAC meetings, if you listen to them. They were not the most dynamic meetings, but it certainly caused conversation, especially towards the end, because some of the pediatricians, some of the other scientists and physicians on the panel said, wait a minute, at this point, can we just authorize it for 18-year-olds and look at 16 or 17-year-olds later? But they went ahead and approved it as is. The approval was 17 yes, 4 no, 1 abstain. And so the vast majority approved moving ahead with this authorization. And again, it went to the FDA. The FDA has it now, and the FDA is putting out notice that it looks like they're going to go ahead and do the emergency use authorization sometime today or tomorrow, and telling the CDC and Operation Warp Speed to just go ahead and get up to speed on what they need to do. So for now, what happens is, again, VRBPAC approved that statement. They sent that to the FDA. The FDA is going to use that statement and the advice from the VRBPAC to decide on the emergency use authorization. By all indications, they're going to go ahead and give that emergency use authorization today or tomorrow. The emergency use authorization may or may not follow the exact same guidelines that the VRBPAC gave them. They could certainly deviate from that, and they can certainly look at a variety of parameters. A couple of things we think they're going to look at are that age issue. Should it be 18-year-olds or should it be 16-year-olds and above? They're also going to look at the allergy issue that has come up over the past couple of days, and I'll talk about that in a while too. And then they'll make their emergency use authorization. Their emergency use authorization is essentially saying, yes, we think this vaccine is safe and effective, or authorizing its use during this time of emergency. So they authorize it. Then what happens is ACIP, which is the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, meets. That's an advisory panel for the CDC. They'll meet Saturday, Sunday, and what they're going to do is they're going to essentially say, okay, we have this emergency use authorization. Now we need to decide who's going to get it, how they're going to get it, when they're going to get it, and how far apart you need to space those vaccines. Because remember, the Pfizer vaccine is a 2-dose vaccine. They tested it day 0 and day 21, 3 weeks later. So more than likely, ACIP will say we need that time frame as well. One thing they might come up with is, because to date we don't have any information on what if you can't get it at day 21? What if you have to wait a week or so later? Can it still work that way? And they might come out with information about that. It'll certainly be in their discussions, as will the issue with the allergies, as will the issue with the age. But what the ACIP will come out with are recommendations for who can get it, when they can get it, and how often they need to get it, at what dosing. They'll give that recommendation to the CDC, and then the CDC will come out with their final recommendations. And as a physician, this is why this is important, because as a physician, once the FDA gives the emergency use authorization, I say, okay, legally I can give this vaccine, but I'm not exactly sure how to give it yet. And so then the CDC gives us recommendations on how to give it, who to give it to, when to give it to them. And then now I know as a physician, not only is it authorized, it's been shown to be safe and effective, but here's how I do it, and here's how I do it appropriately. So those two channels are needed. Those two channels should be happening by the end of the weekend. And once we get that through the end of the weekend, and then most likely we'll start seeing shots in arms Tuesday time frame, maybe even a little bit later. But right now, what FDA has advised, Operation Warp Speed, go ahead and start the distribution process. We are going to get this emergency use authorization looked at, and by all indications it will pass. And then once it does, we want those shots out there so the shots can be given as soon as possible. Now, talking about the allergy issue, which you might have heard about, in the UK, where they started giving out the Pfizer vaccine because they got approval a couple of weeks ago, in the UK, they actually had 2 cases of people having severe allergic reactions to the vaccine. They had what's called an anaphylactoid reaction. Now, you might have heard of anaphylactic reactions, which is a life-threatening allergic reaction to something that you've already been allergic to in the past. This is an anaphylactoid reaction, which is very similar. Difference being, it's very nuanced, the difference being with an anaphylactoid reaction, you've never been exposed to this before, but your body goes through essentially the same process. And so in this case, they've never been exposed to the vaccine, but they had the similar reaction. They had to be given epinephrine, which is the EpiPen essentially, and then they were taken care of at that point. They recovered. But it put some hesitancy in there in the UK's part, and they said anybody with severe allergies should not take this vaccination. And the reason they said that is because they want to look at it. They don't want to eliminate everybody with severe allergies, because somebody might have severe allergies to peanuts, which might have nothing to do with what was in the vaccine. But what they're going to do is they're going to go back, look at these people's, the two people who were involved, look at their medical history. They're going to look at the vaccine, all the different components, and see if they can put everything together and find out exactly what caused this reaction in those two. In the meanwhile, VRBPAC definitely talked about that. FDA will definitely talk about that. ACIP and CDC will definitely talk about that as well, and come out with some recommendations on what to do with people with severe allergies. Because the one thing we don't want is, we do know there are tens of millions of people that carry EpiPens around with them because of allergies to a variety of different things. Food, medicines, even pets you can be allergic to, and you can get this reaction. Bees. So we don't want somebody who's allergic to bees not getting the shot if we find out later that the shot had nothing to do with bees, until we figure all this out. So for right now, what they want to do is basically, at least in the UK, say, if you have severe allergies, don't get this yet. We'll get it to you eventually once we figure out who can get it and who specifically can't get it. Might see the same thing happen here. And again, this doesn't mean that if you have allergies, you can't get the shot. It just means if you have allergies, they're going to have to look at it very carefully right now and decide whether you can get the shot in this initial salvo of shots that are happening. But besides that, the side effects they mostly had during the trials. And during the trials, talked with the Pfizer, and they told us, they shared with us that there were none of these type of anaphylactic reactions in the 22,000 people that got the vaccine. So they're looking more at it. They're looking at it, at the variety of people that are getting it and trying to figure out exactly why that happened. But beyond that, in the trials, the side effects they saw were essentially minor side effects that you get from most vaccines. They had injection site reactions, which is usually redness, soreness, maybe a bump where you get the shot. People complained of fatigues and headaches. That was the vast majority of people. Some people, under 50%, complained of muscle aches, but uniformly, everybody said that their symptoms went away after a day and a half. And so even though the symptoms seemed a little intense for a day or so, a day and a half, they went away very quickly. But one recommendation that some people are giving is when you do get the shot, inform your work. You might not be in the next day because you might not be feeling very well. But typically what this is your immune system kicking in and your immune system starting to work and your immune system giving you these reactions, not necessarily the shot itself. So again, going over the timeline real briefly, yesterday VRBPAC met, that's the advisory panel for the FDA, and they said, yes, we think this Pfizer vaccine should get emergency use authorization. The FDA is meeting today and tomorrow to look at the emergency use authorization and decide whether to give it or not. And then it'll go to ACIP, which is the advisory panel for the CDC. They'll decide who gets it, they'll recommend who gets it, when they get it, how they get it, all the dosing parameters. And then the CDC will take that advice and decide how they want to recommend people getting it. And at that point, since distribution has already started, people will start getting shots, most likely Tuesday, maybe Monday, but most likely Tuesday timeframe. Now, step 2 will be Moderna going through the same process starting this coming Thursday. And so these were separated by a week. December 10th, VRBPAC met for Pfizer. On the 17th, they're going to meet for Moderna, go through the same process. And this process will happen with every shot that is seeking this emergency use authorization. And so this is fantastic news because we're one step further along the line of getting that vaccine. We're very, very close to people starting to get it. If you remember, the CDC came out with, the ACIP met and the CDC came out with their recommendations for who gets it first. And this is phase 1A, which are frontline healthcare workers and people in long-term care facilities. Those will be the first ones to get it. Looks like we might have enough vaccine to cover most of those by the end of the year, but not all of them. And then subsequently, the rest of us will start getting it down the line for general public, probably early springtime before they start looking at getting it. But once we start getting it, once enough people start getting it, we can start getting this pandemic under control. But one big caveat, once you get the vaccine, you're still going to need to wear a mask and social distance for at least a short time frame until we can get the pandemic more under control, because we'll want to make sure that everybody does the same things so that we can get this pandemic under control. We can get it as controlled as soon as possible, and we can get back to our normal lives. Again, thank you very much for being with us. I'll be back this afternoon on another Facebook Live, and I'll answer your questions about the vaccine, coronavirus, the pandemic, all those things we typically do on a Friday during a Facebook Live. We have them. And in the meanwhile, have a great day. Hope you stay happy. Hope you stay healthy.